So we continue with our Samuel reading, and you certainly can't say that Mark wasn't to the point in the gospel, where he describes the relatives of Christ wanting to pull him out of the house. So we'll get to that. So we read from 2 Samuel chapter 1, and then it jumps up to chapter 11, or goes through all kind of content, basically. This is 2 Samuel, I should say. And so here we see the results of this really significant battle described. And as I recall, I'm sorry to say I cannot say absolutely for sure, I think that David was at war here with Saul and Jonathan in this scene. And so Saul and Jonathan both die. And of course, Saul had been anointed king by Samuel and had ended up in perpetual conflict with David, who he saw as a potential replacement king. And of course, it might remind us a bit of Herod and his inability to get over the threat that Jesus represents to him. He feels like the baby Jesus is a threat to him. And so Jonathan is Saul's son, and David and Jonathan get along very well. And so this is a really challenging moment for the king for David, right? That he's lost Saul in a certain sense. He's also lost his dear friend. And so there is a very powerful human element of grief here, of recognition of grief. And David goes through a lot in his life, right? He goes through a lot of suffering, and some of it is kind of his own fault, right? Such as with what happens with Uriah and Bathsheba. Some of it is his fault, but all of us experience loss, and we experience it in different ways. And as a priest told me one time very wisely, when we experience loss, the question is, do we allow ourselves to take that as something that God is allowing us to go through and try to get closer to Jesus in that, to realize that he suffered for us and that he invested himself completely into our condition? Or do we allow it to make us, turn in on ourselves, and hatred and anger? And, one of the things we have to remind ourselves, and this has helped me, and maybe it won't help you, maybe you'll even find it kind of offensive, and it is what it is. I can only give advice and share, and if people don't receive it, or if it doesn't apply to you, that's fine, But to remind yourself that you're not going to escape suffering no matter what. Like, there's no way of living through life where you're not going to experience loss or challenge or suffering. There's no hack that allows you to get out of it, to escape it completely. And it is through those kind of experiences often that we find something about ourselves that's maybe a strength that we didn't know was there, and through God's grace. And so, and in fact, I'm celebrating a funeral in a couple of hours this morning. So there you have it. So we pray for our loved ones and hope that we will receive them in heaven one day. And then we go to the Gospel of Mark, and again, it's a very short excerpt. And one of the things that we see, of course, in this gospel is the immediacy of it, that the action element, like Jesus is constantly on the move, he's constantly doing things. And this is a passage that I can relate to personally, because I always go back to when I was ordained a priest on June 6, 2015. And I remember that, people would come up to receive blessings. And that's like a tradition, is that you receive a blessing from the newly ordained priest, the Bishop Roger Morin of happy memory, was the first one to receive a blessing, and then everyone later on, they received blessings, and one person came back more than once. A couple of people, I think, got more than one blessing, and I was kind of like, and so basically the meal was wrapping up, and I hadn't eaten anything, and I remember that it was kind of like nobody's worried about that, and I just kind of connected with what Jesus is experiencing here, that the need for ministry is almost infinite, right? It's almost infinite. And I think, to understand that it's understandable that people would worry about someone who is being invested in their discipleship, because it seems like that person isn't taking care of themselves reasonably anymore. But, God does take care of us in different ways. And so we are set on a mission by our baptism, right? And God gives us different vocations in life that we are able to continue to use to live out, to live out His kingdom and to do His work in our lives. And so sometimes it may seem that we are focused too much on heaven, but it really always includes earthly concerns as well, but they are supernaturalized and brought up into pursuit of things of heaven. And so as we continue this day, I just pray that we will think about Jesus and his generosity and giving of His time and sacrificing, and ask ourselves, Lord, what are you calling me to do, to lean into, to pray for a particular person or situation, maybe sacrifice something. Lord, what can I substantially do to continue to live out my discipleship?